Welcome, everyone. We'll give it a couple of minutes for folks to join before we begin. Okay, we'll just get started then. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone joining us today. Welcome to our learning call on network disruptions hosted by the Global Network Initiative. I'm Serena Fu, and we have a full, very highly qualified lineup of speakers today. I'll first introduce our speakers and each of their bios, and then I'll pass the floor to our first speaker. I would like to make note as well that of the FIFA Africa Code of Conduct, which can also be found at www.internetfreedom.africa. So today I'm joined by UN Special Rapporteur Clement Boule, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, as well as James Madiya, Zimbabwe Ministry of ICT, Postal and Courier Services, Sandra Aseng from LugNet, Tamiwa Lori from the University of Pretoria, and Eve Nassim from Orange. So our first speaker, UN Special Rapporteur Clement Boule, was appointed as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of peaceful assembly and association, and he took up his functions in April 2018. Mr. Boule is a jurist and human rights defender with over 30 years of experience promoting human rights in Africa and across the world. He was an expert member of the Working Group on Extractive Industries, Environment, and Human Rights Violations of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights from 2011 to 2020. He's also a research fellow at the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. Prior to his appointment, he was Advocacy Director for Africa at the International Service for Human Rights, where he also led the ISHR's program to support human rights defenders working in states in transition. He served as the Secretary General of Amnesty International Togo, and he is a founding member of the West African Human Rights Defenders Network. Over the years, he has advised a number of international, regional, and national entities on human rights issues, and most notably, he has extensive experience engaging with the UN and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to strengthen their work protecting human rights defenders and fundamental freedoms. Mr. Boule has a law degree from the University of Benin, Togo. He holds a master's degree in fundamental rights from Nantes University in France and a master's diploma in international law and armed conflict from the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. Our second speaker is Tamiwa Lori, who is currently a doctoral researcher at the Center for Human Rights, Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria. He also works as a researcher for the Expression, Information, and Digital Rights Unit of the Center. His research focuses on the role of state and state actors in ensuring a rights-respecting approach to preventing online harms, promoting online expression. His interests also include international human rights law, digital rights, ICT 4D, the African human rights system, and various policy impacts of human rights. He's authored publications on these issues and worked with various state and non-state actors on rights-respecting approaches to digital and new technologies. After Tamiwa, we'll have Sandra Aseng speaking, who is a program manager at the Women of Uganda Network. She's a gender and ICT researcher, policy analyst, writer, and Wikimedian. Sandra is an outspoken and energetic human rights defender who advocates for the integration of gender perspectives in ICT policy and analyzes threats to free expression in Africa introduced by regulatory initiatives. She's a Global Voices contributor, a 2020 Global Network Initiative Interviews Fellow, Associate Editor at the Directory of Open Access Journals, a volunteer at Wikimedia Community User Group, and 2021 Optima Data Driven Activism Fellow. Sandra has recently been selected as one of the 40 fellows who will make up the class of this year's virtual edition of the African School on Internet Governance. We also have joining us today Eve Nassim, who received a Master's of Science degree and PhD degree from Stanford University in California in 1978 and 1981, respectively. After years of research, he held various positions, going from operations to performance manager, where he was trained to become a Six Sigma Master Black Belt. In 2006, he held the position of director of the group CTO office, and at the beginning of 2009, Eve joined the CSR activities of the Orange Group as the Deputy Chief CSR Officer. His main field of expertise is group CSR transformation, CSR reporting, stakeholder dialogue, social value creation, and human rights issues. Orange was a founder company of the telecom industry dialogue, addressing the problems of freedom of speech and privacy. Eve was the chair of this organization in 2014, and he's currently a member of the board of the Global Network Initiative. And last but not least, we have James Mutandwa Madiya, who holds a Master of Science degree in Rural and Urban Planning from the University of Zimbabwe. He has a varied career spanning 30 years, ranging from development, project planning, road freight transport management, aviation management, and policy formulation and analysis in the housing, logistics, and transport and ICT sectors of Zimbabwe. He's currently Deputy Director of Policy and Strategic Planning in the Government of Zimbabwe's Ministry of ICT, Postal, and Courier Services. Thrice, James has been selected as a fellow on the ICANN Fellowship Program, first as a first-time fellow, second as a mentor and coach, and third as part of the ICANN Fellowship alumni group to be selected on the Program to a Policy Forum. As the adage goes, once a fellow, one will always be a fellow. James is also an alumnus of AfriSig 2015 and is interested in all aspects of internet governance. He enjoys most being a convener, a special interest which has landed him on the multi-stakeholder coordination teams of the Southern Africa Internet Governance Forum and the Zimbabwe Internet Governance Forum. And James is a member of the faculty team of the AfriSig 20 Egypt Development and Knowledge Sharing event. He's a wealth of contextual information and practical examples from Zimbabwe to share with colleagues, and hopes to take away shared experiences and practical examples from elsewhere in Africa and beyond to contextualize back home. So we have a very highly qualified lineup of speakers with us today. So first, I will pass it on to United Nations Special Rapporteur Bull.
Thank you very much, Sarina, and distinguished experts, minister, colleagues, and friends. It is a pleasure to participate again in the Forum for the Internet Freedom in Africa and address the issue of Internet shutdown. As many of you know, in 2019, I presented to the Human Rights Council a thematic report examining the intersection between the digital technology and the enjoyment of the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. In this report, I expressed alarm at the rise of internet shutdown during critical democratic moments, such as election and peaceful protests and their harmful impacts. I had a clear message. These measures are a violation of the rights to peaceful assembly provided for in Article 21 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and can never be considered a lawful restriction of these fundamental freedoms. Indeed, internet shutdown failed to meet all the conditions provided for in Article 21 of the ICCPR to justify restriction on peaceful assemblies. In particular, internet shutdown are inconsistent with necessity and proportionality requirements in a democratic society. They impose extreme burden on those exercising or expression and exercising their right to peaceful assembly. Large-scale shutdown, in particular, have been deemed a form of collective punishment. State, therefore, are under the obligation to identify and implement alternative means to maintain public order during peaceful protests in accordance with international human rights norms and standards. Since the report was published, I have continued to monitor internet shutdown and issue several communication and press release condemning shutdowns in countries around the world. I raised my concern about this practice in my country visit report on Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka. I engaged with the UN Human Rights Committee as it's developed General Comment number 37 on the right to peaceful assembly to ensure the General Comment include a clear prohibition on the use of internet shutdown relating to the peaceful assemblies. Notwithstanding the progress made at the international level, many states around the world have continued to hinder connectivity and impose internet shutdown with the aim of clamping down on peaceful protests. Shutdown have become an interesting practice in certain regions, especially a means for incumbent regime to retain power and stifle dissent. This is why I presented this June, a follow-up report documenting what I have been observing. First, the number of governments imposing internet shutdown during mass demonstration continue to grow. Since 2019, we have seen many governments adopt these extreme measures for the first time. Many of these countries are in Africa. Second, shutdowns are increasing in length, scale, and sophistication. We are seeing shutdown lasting weeks, months, and even a year. Third, shutdowns are targeting those applications and services most used by protesters, like Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp. States are also targeting internet shutdown circumvention tools such as VNP services, for example, shutdown in Iran, Venezuela, and Mali, showing that the real motivation behind many of these shutdowns is to suppress people's right to peaceful assembly. And four, shutdowns are used as preemptive tools against peaceful assembly, especially in the context of election. For example, in Benin, Belarus, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Malawi, Kazakhstan, Uganda, and other countries globally. And five, some states intentionally use shutdown to target certain groups or individuals, including members of national or ethnic and linguistic minority who are generally more vulnerable to state repression during peaceful assembly. For example, shutdown in Indonesia, India, and Bangladesh. To just give a few examples. 6, shutdown provide cover for serious human rights violation in the context of assemblies. They are often implemented hand in hand with other repressive tactics against protesters. They impede effort to report on and hold governments accountable, making it nearly impossible to document human rights violation in real time. And 7, shutdown have also heightened the risk of joining large gathering and peaceful assembly during the COVID-19 pandemic. In many countries around the world, bans on large gathering are heavily policed and securitized. Shutdown only made the enforcement of this emergency measure more troubling. But the internet shutdown not only violate the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association, but are unequivocally harmful to many other human rights, which in the digital age depend on many digital technologies. Shutdown can affect the right to life and personal safety, personal liberty, and access to justice, free election, and political participation, as well as many social, economic, and cultural rights. Shutdown also threatens sustainable development directly, impeding the achievements of many of the goals of the 2030 agenda. For example, countries lose millions in revenue when both large-scale and targeted shutdowns are implemented, directly hindering the 2013 Agenda Goal 8, 9, and 17. What can we do, and what is the pathway forward? I think the growing scale and intensity of internet shutdown relating to peaceful assembly emphasize the need for strong action by all stakeholders. We have clear international norms and standards. What we need is action by states, companies, international institutions, and other relevant actors to ensure that applicable international human rights norms and standards can be effectively implemented. Because of the limitation of time, let me say this. States as duty bearers have to first refrain from shutting down the internet. In my report, I call states to reform any laws and policy that allow for internet shutdowns and enact legislation prohibiting and punishing these measures. But states are also important international players and can leverage diplomatic engagements to encourage other states to refrain from imposing internet shutdowns. I'm calling for states to strengthen their leadership and promote the implementation of international standards using all the diplomatic, legal, and policy tools available. Companies have also to tackle the shutdown seriously and understand the gravity of the human rights violation that occur during shutdowns. At the most basic level, digital technology companies, including telecommunication providers, should scale up good practice to mitigate the impact of shutdowns. This means developing policy that specifically states their position against internet shutdown and ensuring transparency. But I also encourage companies to move beyond policy commitment and transparency and make effort to challenge these shutdowns. I believe companies can do more to challenge shutdown before the courts. Companies should also engage regulator and push back against licensing conditions. Finally, investors in digital technology companies, including telecommunication companies, are inequally placed to facilitate and incentivize these companies to prevent, mitigate, and address internet shutdowns. However, the involvement of investors in preventing and promoting due diligence on internet shutdown remains exceptional. As first step, investors should publicly communicate their expectation that companies they invest in have in place policy commitment, due diligence process, and effective transparency mechanism addressing internet shutdown, including measures to challenge internet shutdown as appropriate. These are some of the recommendations that you can find in my reports. I encourage all of you to read it. I also encourage all of you also to think also about internet shutdown, not only just as measure for states to ensure the security, but also as moments or as tools that states use to prevent civil society communities to participate in particular and important momentum as election or as any moment that civil society supposed or state people supposed to give their position and their view. And shutdown also prevents any participation. So let me stop there, but I will be happy also to elaborate more and also to engage with you. And I think the ultimate thing that we all, our main objective is to ensure how we can make sure that states resort to other means than the shutdown of internet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Special Rapporteur Gould, for the very comprehensive overview of the global impacts of shutdowns, as well as some of those recommendations that you outlined at the end. I also wanted to make a note for the participants that if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function. There will be time at the end of the call for some questions. So next, I wanted to pass the floor to Tamiwa Olori, who wrote a report on the impacts of network disruptions in Africa specifically. Tamiwa, please take it away.
Thank you, Sarina. So quickly, the Special Rapporteur has laid a very strong foundation with respect to this conversation. And it is not surprising that, most of the issues that he identified were also, some of the major issues that were dealt with in the report that I was able to develop together with the support of GNI. So basically, just a brief overview of the report. The report specifically focuses on internet shutdowns, network disruptions in Africa, but I also needed to sound a note that it's not in all African countries. It didn't focus on all African countries, but while it took pockets of examples across the region, it focused specifically on respondents in 11 countries. So that is to say that the report is not completely reflective of every experience on the continent, but also the experiences that it reflects are also very important to engage with the issue of internet shutdowns in the region. We worked with respondents in 11 countries, and some of the things we tried to achieve was to look at the several examples of how internet shutdowns impact Africans more socially, but by using human rights perspective to view those social impacts. So the report actually it started by giving just an overview of what shutdowns are, but categorizing them, for example, along whether they are complete, that is whether they apply across a particular geographical region for generally maybe in a country, or that means maybe they are total. Financial, in such instances, internet services, including financial services, other internet services, getting information online are completely curtailed. And there are also examples, for example, where they are not total and they're just partial. That is instances where some specific websites are targeted, and in many examples, social media platforms. And some of the reasons often given by governments has always been to ensure public order, guarantee national security, and at the end of the day, they don't give specific examples of these issues of national security. It's just usually a blanket excuse that's usually given. Even in some instances, there have been examples where shutdowns occur, for example, as a result of stopping examination malpractices. So governments give many reasons, but these reasons don't justify, like the Special Rapporteur has said, the need for, it doesn't justify carrying out internet shutdowns. Why? Mainly because, it is usually disproportionate and ideally doesn't comply with international human rights law, which says that, for internet shutdowns or any form of restriction, for example, on human rights to be compliant with international human rights standards, they need to be provided for by law, they need to be legitimate, and not just legitimate by giving, examples of national security that are blanket. There has to be specific examples, and not just those examples. Those examples must actually be able to neutralize whatever harm that is being, suspected that will occur. And in many instances of internet shutdowns, research has shown that internet shutdowns are carried out by governments, in a bid to stop maybe public disorder or breakdown of law and order, really doesn't work in that area. Because, for example, usually what, like the Special Rapporteur said, the shutdowns are usually used in political events. Maybe there's a protest and government does not want maybe that protest maybe to spread and all of that, which is most of the time is within the right of everyone to protest. So there are legitimate reasons like that, but which African governments are not clear on. And there are also the requirement under international law that such shutdowns must be necessary. That means there's no other means to limit, to forestall the harm in question. So for example, governments currently in Nigeria now, I think there are about 3 states that are currently decided to shut down telecommunication services. But there are evidence that there are no clear or alternative measures that were taken other than internet shutdowns. Alternative measures could include ramping up law enforcement law enforcement on the ground. And the reason given was, as a result of security challenges. But the point still remains that shutting down telecommunications for everyone in a state is not the immediate, go-to solution in ensuring that security is better in such a state. So that's an example of where necessity is not applied. And there's also proportionality. That means, it's like using a gun to kill a fly. So there is a problem in a particular state and you decide to shut access to everyone in that state. So it's problematic in that area because cutting access for everyone is not the proportional measure. For example, if there's maybe an online spread of terrorism and all of that, there are possibility to target user-specific, content-specific, content-specific that are content that are problematic, but it has to be specific to particular content, not just short access to everyone online. So these are some of the ways through which African governments violate international human rights law by applying internet shutdowns. And the report also focused, for example, on the human rights impacts in order to be able to tease out the social impact of that of internet shutdowns in Africa. So, for example, some of these impacts include it targets broad aspects of or broad categories of human rights like socioeconomic and civil and political rights. So, for example, for socioeconomic rights, you see the right to work, the right to health, the right to education. When internet is shut down, all these rights are affected. And this is also to bear in mind that we are currently in the global pandemic. So you can combine the effect, the biting economic, psychological, mental, physical challenges of being in a pandemic with not being able to access the internet because the government thinks out of whimsically and arbitrarily thinks that people should not have access to the internet. And there are also rights, civil and political rights, like freedom of expression, the right to public participation, and also the right to freedom of assembly and association. So these are some of the specific ways, targeted specific ways that internet shutdowns impact human rights. And the respondents that we engaged also identified with most of these issues. So, for example, there was a respondent from Egypt that identified, that despite then, during the Arab Spring, that the government decided to shut down internet, even though they were immediately rattled, but because technologies it's not technologies that cause protests. It is people on the ground usually that carry out protests. And at the end of the day, technologies amplify these protests. So they were still able to find their ways to the ground of the protest and carry out the protest as earlier planned, even though the shutdown still partly scuttled their plan. So the social impact is just to show that life generally is impacted and stalled. The enjoyment of human rights, life in general is particularly impacted as people can no longer, exercise their rights, their day-to-day rights as given. And it's in the countries that were surveyed, I think between 2011 and to 2020, I think in the countries that were surveyed, the shutdowns occurred at least for 1,144 days in total. That is to mean that in those countries, on aggregate, more than 1,000 days there was no internet. That's more than 3 years, nearly 3 years of no access to internet in those 11 countries when combined. So these are some of the issues that the report was able to tease out. And this is also to bear in mind that this was just in 11 countries. So if what would have happened, there could be a lot that we could have found if the shutdown, the report covered all the countries that have been affected by shutdowns in Africa. So, and also the report noted that there are competing strategies in fighting internet shutdowns. And I'm saying this also particularly now that the special rapporteur is here. And one of the things that was found, for example, especially in the African context, is that the constitution of the International Telecommunications Union, section Article 34.2, gives states and countries the unfettered powers to limit communications. It didn't qualify those powers, maybe to be based under international maritime law. So if a country, most of the time, even though I haven't seen an example of a country relying on that provision, but in my view, I think that provision is a landmine, which is a landmine for human rights. And if should states begin to weaponize that, it will be deeply problematic. And that's on one side. And on the other side, you will see regional documents, for example, like the guidelines on elections and access to information in Africa, in its principle 27, saying something along the lines that internet shutdowns, if applied, needs to comply with international maritime law, which sort of then poses a confusing stance for a typical political or policy maker, for example, on what to do in order to comply with international rights law and internet shutdowns, when faced with internet shutdowns as an option. So, but however, which then leads me to some of the resources that we identified in the report that could be used on ground, especially in African context, which then led me to the declaration of principles on freedom of expression and access to information in Africa, published by the African Commission. There's a particular provision in that declaration, principle 4, that speaks specifically to when states are faced with conflicting positions on protecting human rights, they are allowed, or they are mandated, for example, they must employ the most favorable provision in such respect, which means that states cannot continue to hide under the excuse that they do not know how to protect human rights when faced with internet shutdowns as an option. Moving on quickly, the report then identifies some long-term solutions in order to be able to advocate against internet shutdowns, as they are patently against human rights standards. And one of them was pushing back through litigation. In courts, both regionally, both sub-regionally, and also nationally. And there have been examples of pushbacks, examples like that. And one other thing that the report noted, which also contributed in a bit to contribute to the conversation ongoing with respect to advocating against internet shutdowns in Africa, was there's a need to identify a set of guidelines and rules that state actors, especially governments, and also collaborated with by other actors like ISPs, internet service providers, civil society actors. There has to be rules on internet shutdowns and making it a no-no. And in instances where there has to be restriction of online content, it has to be very, very specific and compliant with the provisions of, for example, Article 19.3 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And also some of the short-term measures that could be implemented includes also monitoring updates with respect to, for example, most African countries, like I said earlier, are known to always, they are prone to shutting access more during an electoral or political event, maybe a protest or a general election, or in most instances, it's usually those two examples that give rise to internet shutdowns in the region. And another short-term suggestion that was made is for activists and civil society organizations on the ground to always be prepared and also continue to ask more questions. So I don't want to take too much of your time, of the time of the participant, but I think that provides a snapshot of the report and how it relates to this session and the conversation we're having. Thank you, Sarina.
Thank you so much, Tamiwa. That is a very precise and comprehensive overview of some of the very tangible impacts that shutdowns have on the lives of Africans and their human rights. So next up, I have Sandra, but I'm not sure, she might be having some issues. So why don't we go to Eve? Eve, could you talk a little bit about the role of companies and what that looks like in terms of internet shutdowns?
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Yves Nissim, I'm with Orange, and from what we heard with the two previous presentations, I will try to give you operations issues. When you are a company, we do operate, I am with Orange, we do operate in France, of course, but in Europe and in Africa and Middle East, we do operate in about 19 countries in the area of Africa and Middle East. One thing I want to start with is that we are not looking for internet shutdown, because you realize that every time we have a shutdown, we are losing airtime, which is the main part of our business. So definitely, we are not in favor of any kind of internet shutdowns. It has happened that governments are asking us to remove facilities from internet platforms, just to ask us to do internet shutdown, to ask us to shut down the mobile network, and many other type of demands like that. And since we've joined the GNI, we are trying to react to this demand following the GNI principles, mainly trying to push back, but in the environment in which the security of our people on the ground is not at risk. So we've had quite a lot of this demand. I've heard Mr. Vul saying that there is an exploding number of internet shutdown. We have experienced at Orange an increasing number ever since 1915, basically going from 1 or 2 demand per year to about 10 demand per year nowadays. We're reaching a plateau. I mean, it's not exploding, but we're still having a number of demand close to 10 per year for Orange in our African and Middle East countries. Just one point that could be a good discussion we could have is that we are seeing now a plateau in terms of the number of demands, probably because some countries have, some governments of these countries have equipped themselves with technological facilities to be able to probe the network themselves without asking the telco to do a shutdown or to do throttling or to just shut down a given platform. Okay, and the last thing I want to say, and then I will answer any question, is that we are seeing nowadays an increasing number of demands around elections, around civil unrest. And that it is a very specific environment in which one country, in this period of time of elections or civil unrest, is asking us to do shutdowns in 2 or 3 times within the period. It could be 3 days for a given meeting, and then 3 days for a vote, and then 3 days for a second vote, etc. So we are having multiple demands. What we are trying to do, of course, facing this demand is to push back, of course. We have had recently, I can exemplify a little bit what I'm saying with giving you the environment in which we were answering the demand. And I can talk about Guinea. We have had a demand during the change of constitution in which the demand was to provide for the president an extra term. Then the same countries ask us to make a shutdown during election, and the same country ask us to provide a shutdown after election during the time where civil unrest was going on. So you see 3 times for the same country. And what is difficult for a company like us is to make the civil society understand that we are not responsible for the demand, for the shutdown, that we are not responsible for the clear shutdown, that we have tried to push back. Actually, what happened in Guinea is that we've asked, following GNI principle, a written demand, an explanation for the demand. Of course, the explanation was national security. And during the time that we did our demand, time was passing. The government was getting even more nervous. We have had to put a security environment around our CEO locally because there were threats. And finally, what happened is that the government went all the way to the arrival of the fiber in the country and made the shutdown of the whole country themselves. So the whole country was shut down. We didn't do it. The government did it. And I like to tell about this specific example because at that time, the government recognized officially via a message sent by the regulation authority that they were the origin of the demand and they were the origin of the shutdown, which really for Orange locally and for Orange basically in all this country, it's a huge step forward because it made the civil society understand that we are not the people who are doing the shutdown, that we are trying to resist, and we only comply to the demand first if it is, of course, a real demand with a real potential of civil unrest and national security. But most of the time we have to comply because force is used against our people. And as I said, within the GNI principle, the safety of our people is our first priority. So I will stop here. Of course, I will be ready to answer any questions on the subject.
Thank you so much, Yves, as well as for really emphasizing the point that the safety and security of your local staff is a priority in those instances. I wanted to go back now to Sandra to explain a little bit further about the impacts of internet shutdowns on women. Sandra, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarina. Sorry, apologies everyone for disappearing. I had to switch internet. So as Sarina said, today I'll be speaking about the impact of internet shutdowns on women online expression and participation in Uganda. So this was part of the research that we took under the GNI Internews Fellowship 2020. So as we might already know or is yet to know is that it's very stressful to navigate the internet as a woman, especially when the internet is shut down. because as women, we are already a section of the society that generally lack power, and we are systematically marginalized. So these groups tend to use the internet to circumvent or to overcome some of the difficulties that has been already imposed by the imbalance of power and also social restriction. So they tend to see internet as an enabler. Of course, internet is an enabler, but of course, when the internet is shut down, very many of their digital rights, such as the social, economic, and the political rights, are being taken away. But this is not only in Uganda, but is a global problem. And this happens, of course, during the days, the months, the internet has been switched off. So for the case of Uganda, women are already facing the economic hardship, the online threats, the harassment, the surveillance, the lack of accessible content, the expensive internet bundles, the taxation, the insensitive gender ICT policies and internet policies. So as part of the 2020 GNI fellowship, I was glad that I was chosen as one of the fellows. And thanks to GNI team, Internews, and also Ashna, who is from CPESA, for making this possible. So we felt the need to explore the impact of internet shutdowns on women online expression and participation in Uganda. Of course, because there has been a lack of evidence on how internet shutdowns impact these groups and how is it that they cope up with the effects of internet shutdowns in Uganda. So in this research, we looked at specifically the nature and the forms of internet shutdowns and the impact of internet shutdowns on women and girls, and also looking at some of the coping strategies that have been adapted by women and girls to circumvent or to overcome internet blockage. So we tried to conduct a study in 3 districts that is based in the northern and central part of Uganda, and also out of a bit of the central part of Uganda, because we wanted to have a feel of how is it that internet shutdowns impact the urban, the peri-urban, and the rural context. So we used a mixed method because we wanted to get different views from different stakeholders, such as the women, the human rights defenders, the digital security trainers, the telecom service providers, the informal, and people from the informal sectors, and also like from the policymakers, from government agencies, ministries, and also we had to also talk to a few of the district local government employees. So of course, internet is of course being used widely for information sharing, socializing, online business, name it, and even for fun like internet games. But of course, also I would like to clearly also state that there is no doubt that internet shutdowns affect both men and women directly. Of course, it affects the enjoyment of the fundamental freedom of expression, association, and their political participation. But you see, for women, the effects of internet shutdowns tend to go far, and also the effects on how they use the internet compared to men, also how they access some of the development programs, and how they contribute to the national development. Of course, this is further further affected. So diving into the 3 aspects that we researched about, looking at the nature, some of the nature that and the forms of internet shutdowns that were mentioned by the participants. Of course, we had to have like 70% of women and 30% of men. Why the men? Is because we wanted to also understand and learn the perspective of women, of men on the impact of internet shutdowns of women. So some of the forms where the internet service provider disabling network, the Uganda Communication Commission sanctioning block, and then the OTT, throttling, disruption of voice calls, SMS services, and also social media censoring. And of course, there was the aspects of also blocking or shutting down specific websites and applications. But also looking at the results of the research, it showed that they showed that men are more affected by slow connectivity or throttling, while the women were more affected by OTT. So this really shows that women are still really affected economically to access the internet. And now with the 12% tax that has been imposed on internet data, it is really affecting many of the women. And of course, with the blockage of Facebook that is still in Uganda. So looking at the scenarios of also internet shutdowns, we found out that mostly internet shutdowns happen during elections and also when there's visit by high-ranking government officials like the head of state, also during the political public protests, or when maybe there's publishing media prohibit the laws of the Republic of Uganda. Also, there was the aspect of when someone is using the internet in commission of crimes, or when someone sets up a website to carry out online child exploitation or publishing content that is against the state or content that is false or fabricated. So also looking at the aspect of women's online rights, how they were affected. Of course, a number of women's rights and their freedom were affected economically. Women operating this small business online were affected. And of course, their political rights, especially using social media platform to campaign or campaign for the candidate of their choice, or even presenting their political agenda. And of course, looking at also the social freedom of online expression and association with the online group was also affected. And of course, there was the aspect of monitoring and surveillance by state agents, especially when the connectivity is being restored. But of course, we also found out that there are some other rights that are indirectly affected, such as the right to quality healthcare, education services, the access to justice, and also the financial loss was reported by women during shutdowns. Of course, this then means that various rights of women are being abused and violated economically, socially, and also politically during shutdown. And of course, this is worse in areas of rural areas, and of course, some cases in the urban areas. So this means that when internet shutdowns happen, the women experience them differently. And based on our study, we found out that from the rural perspective, because already there's limited access to internet with poor connectivity, women might not really feel when the internet has been shut down. But of course, women in the urban areas are really fast to notice the absence or the limited access to the internet when internet are being shut down. Of course, also men also shared their view that internet shutdowns is a violation of their fundamental rights to freedom of expression, a right that is given to all Uganda according to the Ugandan constitution. So looking at some of the circumvention methods that we found out, of course, we found out that women respond differently during periods of internet shutdowns. Some of them chose to protest, but majority, of course, they silently withheld the situation. Of course, we also found out the high usage of VPN, virtual private networks, during internet blockage, and also to avoid the payment of OTT tax that has already been scrapped off and has been replaced with the 12% tax by the government. So, of course, also still under circumvention in an attempt to adapt to new ways of operating business, some women tended to migrate offline, and of course, this made them to incur some of the additional costs, like the cost of rent, transport, the cost of marketing that could have been avoided with access to the internet. And of course, some women also started to embrace other ways of accessing and using the internet through platforms like VPN and other non-technical or non-internet platforms, such as using the radio, loudspeakers, and also using some of the border couriers company to send and receive money or goods. Also, there was aspect of would shutdowns. As VPN, and of course, some women also reported the aspect of using the Tor browser bridges, sales for internet access. But also, we need to ask ourselves, are some of these VPNs safe? So we need to look into that. And of course, looking into the overall finding, we also found a lot of low illiteracy skills, especially in the rural areas. So looking into this, of course, we think that it's important to strengthen a lot of awareness campaign on the critical role that has been played by the internet in advancing women's rights online, and of course the rights of the marginalized groups such as the LGBTI, persons with disability, women in the rural areas, name it. And of course, we need to start now advocating some of the internet rights and freedom. I know some of you might be part of APDEC, and it has been it has some laws that works around the African aspect. Of course, also providing more trainings on network disruption, on how to document some of the blockage, the blocking of websites, applications, and how it affects the specific vulnerable or marginalized groups is important, because then this gives us a go-ahead or evidence or the human impact of internet shutdowns of different groups. So based on this, of course, I was also, after this fellowship, but it also came in handy from the Optimum Internews fellowship, that I was part of the training. And of course, it came in handy because it was close to the February 2021 election. And of course, with this, it was more different because it was an outrage, something that Uganda had never felt. So I conducted a study also to find out the impact of internet shutdowns on women in Uganda based on the 2021 general elections. Of course, there were different digital rights advocacy bodies such as CIPESA, UNI, NIMIT, who had documented some of the evidence to show that internet shutdowns had happened. But of course, looking at the quantitative aspect does not really tell the story of how internet shutdown has impacted the social, personal, and the professional lives of women in Uganda. So we, of course, also incorporated the network measurement tools to build the parameter of when shutdown occurred, and also, of course, continue to occur to provide evidence of the existence of network disruption and also how it affects this group. So we use some of the network measurement data such as UNI, IODA, and also the Google Transparency Report to find out the internet outrage and internet blockage in Uganda. And of course, to further understand the perspective of these groups, we had to use the social network analysis method and of course interviews with 15 women, the LGBTI community, the refugees, the women, the persons with disability, to understand how women are differently affected when internet shutdown of course is what happens. So doing this, of course, you know that with network disruption, it leaves out some aspects of that are huge, and of course it's unquantifiable. And of course, some of these aspects like the economic hardship, the threats, the surveillance can't be had via a network measurement. So we had to interview them and of course hear their stories, and of course getting this real impact of internet shutdowns of women are really a strong tool to continue fighting against shutdowns, to make internet accessible. Of course, internet is a basic need, so we should access it. So exploring such impacts gives us advocates, researchers, a chance to also observe, feel, and also get first-hand information, and also reflect on the real impact on the psychological, the social, the personal life of women, how it's affected. And of course, these are not shown in the network measurements. So I would like to stop here and hand over to Sarina. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And I think it's really in order when we're having these conversations to highlight the disproportionate impacts of network shutdowns on these marginalized and vulnerable communities, particularly women. Now, last but not least, I wanted to pass it over to James. James, do you have any sort of responses or reactions to these reports, as well as what can you say from the government perspective with regard to internet shutdowns? Oh, if you're speaking, James, I think you're on mute.
We can hear you, Minister. We can hear you. No, we still can't.
Sorry about that. Can you now hear me?
Yes,
yes,
we can hear you now.
Yes. I was saying the focus from the presentations we got was on internet shutdowns, yet the task was on network disruptions. I think network disruptions fits well with our perspective as government. Why do I say so? An internet network disruption occurs when there is an outage resulting in end users losing a connection. And this makes it difficult for the end users to use the internet or to communicate or access content. It is important to delineate between the types of internet disruptions to ensure that the coverage and discussion of such events are technically accurate, deriving the appropriate actions intended to mitigate or eliminate future disruptions, including even policy making, increased investment, and network infrastructure improvement. A greater understanding of these differences will guide the responses, which should be commensurate with the scope of the disruption. There are two broad types of network disruptions. One is unintentional or accidental disruption to internet connectivity at a local network provider or national scale. In this case, the most frequent cause of such outage could be physical damage of fiber cables, severe weather, poor power outages, routing misconfigurations, or DDoS attacks against the network infrastructure components. Then the second type of internet disruption results as an intentional disruption of access to a specific site or application, e.g. to WhatsApp, to Twitter, to Wikipedia, or a set of sites or applications or messaging tools on social media. The blocking of this type is often politically motivated and is intended to limit the ability of citizens or groups to organize protests or to prevent dissemination of certain information. Surprisingly, whilst that happens, other types of content, e.g. e-commerce sites, financial services, e-government, etc., may remain available. Let me go into the presentations that we got from our colleagues. From UN Special Rapporteur, I'm happy to have noticed that they have observed that there is an alarming number of internet shutdowns happening in Africa. Motivation is usually the same: to suppress peaceful association of assembly. I'm also happy to have heard from the rapporteur that shutdowns are threatening the targets of the 2030 agenda. From the Ministry of ICT perspective, we are saying the internet, which is part of ICTs, are enablers to achievement of the SDGs. So if you shut down the internet, then you are actually shutting down the enablers to achievement of the development objectives. I'm also happy when he says the legal and policy areas must be looked at. In this case, for government, we are actually keen for that for telecom operators, they have up the challenge and also play their part should they be demanded to shut down the internet. From Miwa Ilori's report, cutting access for everyone is not a proportional measure. In this case, he is saying that after all, the state may not achieve its end. You may shut down the internet, you keep the people quiet today, but that does not mean that they can't rise tomorrow. He rightfully points out that ITU Article 34 is one of the strategies prohibits network operators from disrupting communication. I then move on to Orange. Orange is saying that governments have acquired technology to probe operator networks. Yes, that can actually have happened, but the operators still have a right to refuse or to argue out that they are losing out instead. Like he mentions, they lose airtime. They should not answer the demand for a shutdown. In fact, in our case, sometime in January, one operator even took the state to court. And there was a ruling that shutdowns are illegal. So if we search through the regulations, we will actually find out that the regulations and even the Constitution makes it illegal for internet to be shut down. Sandra talks about shutdowns affecting women differently in urban areas and in rural areas. And I'm reminded that there is still an urban to rural digital divide. I'm happy that the organization has also gone further to do network measurements. And through network measurements, that's when the organization will be able to understand the level of disruption. Is it through throttling? Is it a partial shutdown or a total shutdown? That's all I observed from the reports. But I agree with all of them, what they are saying, and we in government are beginning to take these ideas on board. And like I said, we are going to consider these in our review of future national ICT policies. Thank you, Sarina.
Thank you so much. And I think thank you for your thoughtful responses. And that's promising to hear that government will continue to take this in review. I noticed that there are a couple questions and we still have about a couple minutes left. Maybe let's answer this first question from Francisco to UN Special Rapporteur Bull. He wanted to ask if there are updates in the current Tigrayan and Ethiopian crisis. Are there any reports being worked on right now pertaining to this issue? And I guess that's in relation to internet shutdowns or network disruptions there as well.
You want me to comment on this question now? Or?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so, well, let me say that I know there is actually a report done by OSH and National Human Rights Institution, which was mandated by the Human Rights Council. But I'm sure some of this issue will come out from that. But from my perspective, or if he is asking if my mandate is doing a report on this, I just wanted to say that my mandate, I only do the report when I have chance to visit the country, when I'm able. And Ethiopia is one of the countries that I'm engaged in terms of conducting visits. But I can tell you that some of this issue, we communicate with government through communication procedure, which is not necessarily a report, a formal report that we drafted on that. But I think there is also a lot of information on civil society websites around this shutdown.
Thank you, UN Special Rapporteur Bull. Maybe I have a question. If there are any other questions from the audience, I wanted to pose a question to all of the panelists. It seems like much of our discussion has been very comprehensive, but what sort of the focus has been on the human rights impacts and the effects of shutdowns. What can be done to sort of mitigate the effect? I know, Tamiwa, you briefly mentioned litigation and taking problematic laws into courts. Sandra, you mentioned using VPNs to sort of bypass that. What other measures can be taken to mitigate internet shutdowns or network disruptions for any, this is for any of the panelists?
Sarina? So
Yeah.
thank you. Just wanted to try and attempt the question. So I had highlighted earlier that you know, for example, you know, it's international treaty-making bodies like the United Nations and the African Union do not specifically, you know, say in specific words that this is what, you know, countries must do. But so far, in the past, they provided guidelines, they provided steps that countries must, you know, use when, for example, making a specific law or rules with respect to a specific issue. And I think it is high time, you know, that the report from the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Assembly, the reports on from the Special Rapporteur on Women's Rights, the report from the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, all of these rules, this body of law, norms setting could come together and, you know, at some point form a set of guidelines for states. Because I imagine that a typical policymaker, you know, may be genuinely faced with the challenge of implementing either, you know, ensuring security and, you know, also protecting online rights, but, you know, are left with no guide on how to ensure that. So I feel that, you know, such body of laws or norms that could be used by states to guide their actions when faced with such instance will be really useful. It will be difficult, but I don't think it's impossible. Thank you.
Yes, so I think there are a number of the way that civil society can also ensure that they hold the government accountable whenever the government resorts to the internet shutdown. Engaging, for example, litigation at the national level or regional level. And I think the recent decision of ECOWAS against Togo is really an important step, you know, because the ECOWAS recognized clearly and states in the decision that there is no legal basis for Togo to resort to this internet shutdown. And I think this also helps to already make sure that states understand that internet shutdown is a violation of human rights and it does not have any legal basis, and that is completely disproportionate. And I think this is what come out from people are saying, because if you resort to the internet shutdown and without the internet shutdown cannot even meet this the requirement of proportionality, because you resort to the internet shutdown, it affects people disproportionately. So you cannot meet this criteria. And I think it's important that we ensure that national courts and regional courts are able to elaborate. Yes, I agree with you. There is a lot of guidance that we put there. The Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, my mandate, women mandate. And we also try as much as we can also to raise awareness with tech companies, including those who are based in Silicon Valley, to ensure that they understand the need for them to really ensure that they apply due diligence and also push back some requests from countries, you know, and be transparent whenever there is this request.
Thank you so much, Tamiwa and UN Special Rapporteur Fool. If there are not any, I'll maybe pause and see if there are any other interventions from the other panelists. And if not, maybe then we can wrap up and I'll pass it back to you, UN Special Rapporteur, for any closing remarks that you might have. Oh, Sandra, sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarina, for giving me the opportunity to speak again. I know previously I talked about some of the ways that women can navigate and access the internet during the blockage. But also I wanted to point out that with this aspect of also using the VPNs and other methods to circumvent blockage during internet shutdowns, it's very important to know that only a fraction or a small fraction of the tech savvy who are majorly men know how to get to the other side of the firewall, because circumvention tools are really very complex. And of course, there has also been some aspect that the proposed circumvention tools that can are being potentially blocked by the authoritative regimes. Like in Uganda, MTN, of course, blocked access to VPN server using the Open VPN protocol, and also the Tor Browser project. So looking at this, we need to look into the other aspect, of course, and of course ensuring that it is not about also just circumventing, but also ensuring that as both the different groups also use the browser safely, ensuring that the browser that they use is safe, like having over HTTPS and not HTTPS. And of course, using some of the advocacy organizations like Access Now. And Access Now has really been of help with that digital security helpline. And of course, this also personally helped me. Kudos to Access Now team to find ways of course, circumventing or accessing internet when internet is blocked. But of course, when Uganda faced the blockage, the outrage during the 2021 February election, Felicia, of course, was calling and trying to help Felicia from Access Now to find ways to connect during the blockade, but we couldn't access or find other ways. And of course, by then, I remember I was working on the team who were monitoring elections. And of course, we couldn't tweet any of the views or some of the things that were happening. So this discussion has to be discussed into details, and we need to find ways of how people can navigate and access the internet in case of an outbreak. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. So I think we're at time. So UN Special Rapporteur Will, do you have any closing words for us?
Thank you, Sabrina. I want to thank all the panelists, and I want also to thank also the minister for also corroborating some of issue that we put forward here, in particular the fact that internet shutdown delay or can have impact on the implementation of SDGs. And today we know that in our continent, people rely more on the internet to be able to survive. Today you can see women working in a village, in rural area, they rely on internet. So it's important that internet, which is an open tool that inform people. And I want just to give also one example. When I was in Armenia during the country visit, as you know, Armenia went through this Velvet Revolution, which was really peaceful. And one of the things when I met at that time, the Prime Minister, which won the election, asking him how this movement was peaceful. What is the secret? How happened? And one of the things he told me is that because we are able to communicate with protesters, our supporters, we are able to continue to monitor what is going on. And we are able to inform people whenever we saw that there is a misinformation, to tell them that no, police is not shooting. There is no shooting everywhere. You have to keep peaceful and everything. So meaning that whenever the internet is shut down, you create this incentive for violence, because people are not able to communicate and people rely only on information that they have. Or somebody will say that there's a shooting here and people start also committing violence. So I think that's why I'm insisting that shutting the internet to prevent peaceful protests, sometimes it has contrary effects. And I sincerely hope that the minister will work also with civil society to ensure that the national framework prohibits completely internet shutdown, because internet shutdown is clear violation of human rights and it prevents people to achieve their fundamental freedom. And I would like also to thank the Orange, the Eve Nissim, who also recognized this increase of internet shutdown, in particular when it comes to peaceful protests, but also during the election period. And he gave us some of concrete example in Guinea, which also shows that we need to do some work. And I want to recognize that the work that companies are doing to try to resist, but sometimes they are not understood by government. And I want also to tell that my mandate is also here to be able also to remind whenever government do something, to say the company need to expose that. So we are able also to advocate and to push back. And I think there are so many important things that we say here, the impact of internet shutdown on human rights, but we have also to understand, and I think you mentioned that, Barbara, I can't remember the name, lady, but the disproportionate impact of the internet shutdown on women. And I think we understand also that it's important also to bear in mind that whenever the internet is shut down, vulnerable groups are more impacted. And the COVID-19 also increased these trends. And as you know, I put forward my 10 principles, and I remember a country that the internet shutdown should not happen. And during COVID time, we all relied on the internet. But we saw that even during COVID time, some governments resort to the internet shutdown, where we were not even able to see each other. And this is the only way that we can communicate. Some governments resort to that. And I think we still need to make some advocacy on that. And I want also to really mention that in relation to the ITU, I think in my report I said that the ITU legal regime on suspension of telecommunication, which predates the digital era, is ill-suited, and to prevent misuse by governments and address the threats that internet shutdown poses to human rights, including the right to freedom. And I think the Article 34 of the ITU Constitution is particularly troubling, as it could be interpreted to authorize internet shutdown, and including on a broad and indiscriminate, in the broad sense and indiscriminate manner. And we need also to do that. And I call in my report the ITU to review this article and to ensure that it's compliant with the digital era that we are living. Internet is important today. Internet is a space to expand our democratic right, to expand our democratic freedom. But internet is also important today for development. And I want also from many countries, African countries, and I always give them example. If you look at Silicon Valley, many people become rich because of that, because of internet. And if we are shutting internet down, we are not equipping our young generation to have internet, then we are delaying our own development. So I think that it's important to really make sure that we do all we can, including government, to make sure people understand the importance of internet, the importance of people to be able to communicate during this peaceful protest or election period, and also to ensure that the internet shutdown is understood as a clear violation of human rights and play a contrary role that we can aim for, like a security, national security, which we know that there is no harm. I mean, the internet, you shut down the internet, you are not preventing those who are probably who have bad intention to continue their acts. You prevent many people that may not have a possibility to have another information to rely on what they have in the streets. So you need internet to keep internet in this moment for government also to be able to communicate. To be able to communicate when there is a disinformation, to say this is the right information. And because I hear many times when during the election, government say, no, we shut down the internet to prevent that people miscommunication the result of election. Government shall communicate that. And what people want is to have proper information to know what is going on. And this channel is the channel that the government can reach people. So I just wanted to thank you, and also to thank the minister and all the panelists and Orange representative also, and to say that my mandate is committed to continue to advocate to ensure that internet shutdown is completely banned and is also treated at the national level as clear violation of human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, UN Special Rapporteur, as well as to the other panelists. Thank you for those who've attended, and please take care and be safe.
Thank you.